delighted today to be spending some time with Charlie Hoult, Northeast businessman, entrepreneur, advisor, and high-profile tech investor. As many of you will know, Charlie Hoult over many years has advised, invested in, started up, scaled and exited many businesses. Charlie's a huge personality with bags of character, so thoroughly looking forward to spending some time with Charlie today on our podcast. Charlie, first of all, massive thanks for agreeing to spend a little time with me this morning on this podcast. Whilst we spend stacks of time together, normally it's with a shareholder or board group sat in front of us, Charlie, so nice to spend a bit of one-on-one time with you. I thought it would be really great if we could just start by understanding a little bit more about where your career all began. And I guess my first question is just to understand why you always seem to have gravitated toward technology, even from a very young age when you were working as an executive for a PR comms agency, but only working with the tech sector.
Well, that's where the jobs were.
Okay.
So I trained as a journalist, but in 1992-ish, there were no jobs in journalism.
Right.
In the back of The Guardian. And I saw an advert for a tech PR marketing communications agency called Text 100.
Yep.
And I was their employee number 75 or something like that.
Okay.
And I absolutely loved it. The innovation piece and change, and that's where the growth is. And I just figured technology is always going to be there, and it's always going to be interesting and exciting, and so I signed up. Yeah.
And was that your first job after
It was my
education,
first proper job.
Charlie?
Yeah, after uni. Yeah,
Okay.
I had some internships and work experience.
Sure.
But the agency was famous for doing Microsoft's PR. So the agency launched everything that Microsoft had done in the UK and went on to work with Microsoft as Microsoft rolled out across the world, India, China, etc., going up to, 1,200 people.
Hence the attraction, presumably.
I didn't ever work on the Microsoft account.
You didn't?
I always worked on the less well-known runners and riders. My favourite, or one of my favourite accounts, was Harvard Graphics,
yes,
which was killed by PowerPoint. Wow. It was the original presentation software.
Oh, wow,
and so
okay.
I was in the Pepsi camp rather than the Coca-Cola camp, trying to claw away at stuff. It was great fun, really great fun. Yeah.
And whilst you were doing your degree at uni, Charlie, you'll have had your sort of sights set on something. Did you know you were going to go into sort of PR comms? Was that always the intention?
Yes. Yeah, I think I always dreamt of it. I read English literature and then journalism, and I vaguely understood that marketing communications was a thing, and I absolutely still love words and putting words together, and that elevated into the strategy aspect of marketing. I dreamt of being a McKinsey, Bain management consultant, and I had always been interested in business. And when I read things like Porter's Competitive Advantage, Michael Porter's 5 Forces, I was like, those are sort of penny drop moments of how you understand strategy. And I did apply for some strategy consulting houses and got knockbacks. I got a couple of interviews, but
they're lost, Charlie.
They're lost. Yeah. I think I mean, the great thing about working in a consultancy, even a PR consultancy, rather than getting a marketing job in a manufacturer or in-house in one company, is that you get a lot more variety. In
terms of end sector, end client.
Yeah. I work with Harvard Graphics, I work with a fantastic Taiwanese computer manufacturer called Copam, no one's ever heard of, that did the actual base manufacturing for Dell and decided to come to try and get into the UK as well. Completely failed, but you get these cases to work on, and you then, rather than just working on one thing and rolling it to death, you get a new one, and that appealed to my starter initiator aspects. I work hard at being a completer finisher.
Yes.
But I'm much more of a starter initiator.
Sure.
And so getting these new projects to work on was really good. Yeah.
And you mentioned, Charlie, that you knew from a very early age that you wanted to be in and around business.
Yes.
Where did that come from? Where is the business itch coming from?
So I'm the fourth generation in a family business. My dad was third generation. He was running a family business for his 12 cousins. And it was Hoult's Removals, which was a furniture removals, trucking, logistics business with offices in Glasgow, Newcastle, Nottingham, North London, South London, doing a kind of arc of deliveries along that. And he eat, sleep, drink, repeat business. He loved business, and I was his only son. Both my sisters are quite well versed in it all, but he used to have Fortune magazine. He loved America. And he had a great sort of, America's where you learn it all, there 5 years ahead. He had Fortune magazine, he had all those Dale Carnegie books, and so I just sort of picked it up through osmosis, I suppose. And I was born in '67. I was sort of coming of age in the '70s when Britain was the sick man of Europe, and there were electricity strikes everywhere. And it was a tough time to have your own business, interest rates of 15%.
That's right.
And there was a certain amount of stress, in a family business of where's the next, money is there going to be enough money for the payroll at the end of the month and all of that aspect. And I just drank that all in and thought I wanted to make some money, build a sort of capitalist money engine so that I wouldn't have to worry about those things.
Yes, and I can imagine the conversations over the breakfast table as a family. Did your father ever try and encourage/insist that you join the family business? And
No, he positively discouraged me. He wanted me to make mistakes on someone else's turf / their money.
And then return to the family business?
And then ultimately he hoped for a return. Yeah, I think he bred great independence in all of us, and then was slightly sad that none of us were anywhere near, and it was only a sort of by accident, as it were, that I ultimately came back and took over.
Yes.
But we had my younger sister Annabelle, who is also very business savvy. She did work for strategy management consultants. She did an MBA at INSEAD in top European business school, and there she did courses, the modules on family business. So we had been running 20 years, we've been running family boards about those three aspects of family business: owning, being part of a family, and being a manager, which are, Olympic rings, Venn diagrams of overlap, and helps you identify that we were owners but not managers.
Yes.
In the business. My dad was managing it, but we worked through quite a lot of psychodrama of where our objectives were in life and whether we were going to align with taking over the business, etc. And we all got to quite a ripe old age with quite a lot of experience without working with my dad, who loved to be in control.
Yes. And just on that, obviously we'll talk a little bit about your career and how it developed in a moment, Charlie, but obviously fundamentally, your sisters decided to run the family business. I mean, how do you think genuinely that sat with your father, especially once you guys had gone out independently and developed your own expertise and credentials? I mean, do you think that would have been disappointing from his perspective?
If we hadn't taken it over?
Yes.
You have a complicated relationship with your parents.
Absolutely.
And while he was a third generation, he pruned buying out all his cousins. And in fact, he sold his house. We lived with my granny for a couple of years. one of my earliest memories is sitting in the bath with him. So he was not small. I must have been quite small to fit in the bath with him. And he was talking me through the merchant bank that had given him the leverage to be able to buy out his cousins. So he'd sold all his assets.
Wow.
He cashed them up, put all the chips and bank debt into paying his cousins out.
And how old were you at this point, Charlie? I don't know if you can recall, but...
I must have been about 8 or 9.
Wow, so very young to be having a
Yeah,
business conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was therapy for him. I was like, I mean, I was genuinely sort of interested. County NatWest, I can pretty much remember the whole conversation. County NatWest were the merchant bank, and he gambled at everything. So he was really an entrepreneur. He was a first generation primary driving entrepreneur, and I am the same. I like to do my own thing, have my own starter, initiator, trailblazing, push aspect to it.
And obviously spending that time in the bath with your father, understanding how he was going about growing the business will be part of that. But what is your why?
Yes.
What do you think has always encouraged you to be a go-getter, an entrepreneur versus, following the man in front of you?
You do the maths.
So you mean economically it makes more sense?
Yeah, yes, I'm a capitalist. I want to build capital. And, there's all those books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is that the name of the book? Yeah. About, if you work for wages, then you get wages. If you build your own business, you get wages and the capital appreciation of the business. And I clocked that very early on. And I don't know why, nature, nurture. I always loved doing business plans. Around the corner from here, there's a building which is still empty, which is owned by David Cowper, who is he one of your clients?
He is, indeed. Good memory.
He owns some real estate in the centre of Newcastle, but he was really a explorer and sort of gentleman explorer. And there's a building which I looked at and I thought, that would make a great cafe. And I did business plans for this, how many tables and you then go, how many tables, so how big the kitchen, and that logic puzzle, it just sort of fascinates me. I was doing it this morning with, where was I thinking about tips or beggars in the street and how I don't carry cash anymore. And how do you, is there an app to tip for people or to transfer money? And there are a few, but they're not, but could you build a business where I can give you 10 quid just by tapping your phone? I was like going through all of those things of, all of the thoughts around that. How do you build it? If you got it, would you link it to a bank account? Would you have some kind of pot where everyone puts 30 quid in and I then, is it viral to give you a fiver and then you go, I haven't got the app, or you've got to get the app, blah, blah, blah. Is that a £1 billion business? And we sometimes my dad did get sort of asked for angel investment. And we would do like Dragon's Den around the Christmas table. I remember a business that did like air fresheners in toilets, in corporate loos or whatever. And they, we had the business plans, we all read them and stuff like that. I just, eat it up. I absolutely eat it up.
And obviously you said yourself, Charlie, that you are a capitalist and you like to create value.
Yeah.
Why? And obviously financial independence is part of that answer, but once you've got beyond financial independence, why does one see an attraction in creating capital? What's that all about?
It's a chess game. It's like, how do you do the moves? And chess is, there's different chess pieces that do different moves, and that is fascinating. Keeps your brain whirring, and if it's like a puzzle, unlocking the puzzle, and the rules are that succeeding, winning, progressing are that the money aspect moves forward. But there are a load of other subsidiary aspects to it. And I mean, I spent an internship in the summer of when I was at university for a business called Ethical Consumer as a research analyst around values-based investing. So we analysed whether companies were invested in tobacco, defence, gambling.
Which then would have been quite novel, actually. I mean, now that's
it was very early. Yes, it was very early in that. But and it was a business in Benwell.
That's right.
And I worked with a guy who's now an LSE professor when he was like 25 or something, and that was fascinating because it was subject-based stock analytics. But yes, there's a whole world of that now, and it's an adjacency to is this a good investment for making me money?
Yes.
But it showed a wider aspect that there is making money and there's changing the world.
Yes.
And many entrepreneurs are driven by making money and making history.
Yes, both.
In terms of change and harnessing and being in control of and wanting to be recognised for making the world a better place, making a parking app that means you don't get a parking fine, or whatever chew that you've had in life that gives you a spark and an idea.
I love the analogy that you've just drawn between business and chess. And obviously in chess, and chess is a game I play often, actually with my father, there can only be one winner in chess. Do you view business that way? I.e., do you enjoy business because you want to be the winner, accepting therefore there has to be a loser?
The journey is the reward. In business, you are playing chess to have time with your dad.
Sure thing.
Not to beat him.
That's right. Exactly.
And to have
that's
two
objectives,
that's
Charlie.
there is a competitive tension.
Indeed.
Is an excitement, and you don't have to, but you can have win-win aspects to it. And,
Yes.
Certainly with Opencast Software, which is the latest scale-up business that I'm involved in, we are playing a number of factors. Being sustainably financially successful is a bedrock, but also going for B Corp and looking at values-based success is innovative. We think it's trailblazing, and we think it's very much the right thing to do. Profit with purpose.
Yes.
And so that's part of the unlocking, is that yes, we're making chess moves on how do you make the business make a profit, a good profit, sustainable, long term, but we're also looking at in a environment where the key challenge is actually finding and training and developing talent. How do we get people very much engaged in the business? And I think it's a far-sighted way to involve those people in all sorts of career-based, growth-based and wider values-based engagement with the corporate entity, that also sharing in owning it.
Yes, and we'll come back to Opencast, Charlie, if you don't mind, just in a moment. But just to go right back to where we started just 10 minutes back. So obviously Tex 100, your first job outside of university, stayed there for I think about a year or so, Charlie.
Yeah.
And then of course, Wilson Harvey. Could you just tell us a little bit about Wilson Harvey and how that business came about, please?
I worked for another agency. I thought that working for tech was interesting, and I wanted to also work, having had some exposure to the city and being in London where I was living, I wanted to work in tech in the city. And I worked for a company called Right Image, which is now called Meta, something like that. And we worked in tech for the city.
Right.
And something like a third of all spending on computers is spent by the financial services sector.
Right.
So it was hugely interesting, and we worked in many product niches, supplying tech for the many niches of the City of London, whether that's Lloyd's Insurance, General Insurance, program trading in the dealing rooms. I had a client that had particularly thin screens to make it easier to build a trading desk. So it was great in-depth stuff there. And what was your question again? Sorry.
It was to understand how Wilson Harvey is
a
business.
So I had some clients, and I'd done tech, then I'd done the city tech and comms, and then one of my clients said that they had got venture capital, and that they were going to spend £1 million on marketing. And so I sort of saw the opportunity to say, well, I had developed to be your account manager, and there was nobody else working with me and the client. And so maybe I could bob off with that client and help them to grow that business.
And that was the catalyst to setting up your first business then?
That was my first business, which was Wilson Harvey.
Indeed.
And Wilson was my middle name. Harvey wasn't quite my partner's middle name, but his middle name was James. And Wilson James Limited was already registered. So we had to, at the kind of altar in those days in the accounting company that we were registering with, we had to find something that wasn't registered, and Harvey was like a middle name type of word that I wanted, from a branding perspective, something that was very easy to spell over the telephone. Everyone used the telephone the whole time, and I thought we would save hours of our lifetime if it was very spellable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Wilson Harvey was quite pronounceable and spellable.
Yes.
And we grew that with my dear business partner Paul Burgess from 2 to 50 people. Yeah.
And obviously there was a long journey over the years building that business. It would be fascinating to know, Charlie, if there was one thing you learnt which today has been the catalyst to bringing success into the businesses you've invested in / advised. I appreciate there'll be lots of learnings, but what would be the one thing that you learned early on?
What I really wanted to set up was a magazine.
Okay.
And I really wanted to set up a magazine, and I did, again, in my weekends and spare time, my thinking through. The magazine was going to be called Convergence.
Okay.
And it was which would have been and still is a huge topic area, technology, TMT, all those technology, media, telecoms were converging back then when people used the telephone, and I spent a lot of time in my junior years sending faxes of press releases to people, and then automating fax merges. And so convergence was a topic area that I was interested in, and newsletters were interesting. I actually got the chance about 18 months after I set up Wilson Harvey to buy a newsletter business, which we rebranded Incisive Media, and we had the very sexy titles Call Centres in Finance. This was like a 20-page monthly newsletter that was about £700 to subscribe to per year, and Insurance Technology Report, Financial IT, so all of those city tech areas and all of the growth areas within that for CTOs of financial institutions who would sign off a £900 fortnightly, monthly update, like to get themselves in it and reported. It was a very niche, niche journalism. I bought that business, and the due diligence hadn't quite told us that we bought it for a figure, but the subscriber base had the previous owners took the annual subscriptions rolled up beforehand, and we had to fulfill those subscriptions.
Right.
And for 3 months in a row, having spent, and I had some inheritance from my granny, I put that down, I got a loan of say 120 grand on top of that, and I lost £15,000 a month for 3 months in a row.
And that's because all of the income had already been
We didn't have any new income, we just had the costs.
But you had the cost to come through. So in terms of the learning...
The learning was, when your back is against the wall, when the shit hits the fan, you get very good at spreadsheets.
Yes. I guess the second learning might be to make sure when you buy a business, actually you get the proper advice around DD, because that's such an obvious thing to not have overlooked.
Yes, no, it was a clockwork inside a business that I hadn't done before.
Sure thing.
And so we were kind of tripped with a aha moment. Well, that's what you paid for, but you didn't get the money to fulfill those subscriptions, so you're going to have to run it till you start getting some renewals.
Yeah.
And it was cute of the previous owners to get everyone to renew ahead, so they got our purchase price and the money for the year ahead. And we hadn't negotiated that back out. But it's more about how you understand line by line. And when you're losing money, which are the lines? Yeah, and so, that was a baptism of fire.
But as you say, when business is going good, arguably, you learn little. And when, as you say, the obvious is hitting the fan, that's when you're forced to learn, because hey, if the business is on the line, you sit up and take note quick. So in terms of Wilson Harvey, obviously that was your first business that you owned. At what point did that business become a business that you didn't want to be in?
So I sold Incisive Research after a couple of years, doing on my capital a very healthy return. Yeah, we paid the debt off and maybe 4, 5, 6 times. Yeah, awesome. And that was when I was like 38 or something like that. So I was relatively young to make a good, 6-figure sum. And but what I realised was that they paid us 5 times profits, and their business was valued at 15 times profits. Yes. So the arbitrage of the PE ratio, which is stock in trade for you corporate finance folk, made me realise that if you were the people with the bigger business, you could buy things at a discount to your valuation, absorb those profit streams, and then increase your valuation. And so that's what we subsequently did with Wilson Harvey. What I did with Wilson Harvey was go on a roll-up spree. I got a backer, a sort of business angel, Dragon's Den backer, and we merged with another company, Paper for Paper. So we had gone through the downturn of sort of 9/11 and things like that. It was 2004. We were 30 people. They were 30 people. Yep. We merged for Paper, so that there was no money changed hands. And then we got an investor in, and that business of 60 people with about 10 different, some bolt-on and then bigger acquisitions, became the Lowy Group with 450 people and 40 million turnover.
And the investor you mentioned, was that Luke Johnson?
That was Luke Johnson, yes. First Luke, then
Luke's background, just because.
So Luke Johnson is like the figures in Dragon's Den. He's slightly ahead of those guys. When he was in his 20s, he was a city analyst, and then he got the opportunity to lead a buyout of Pizza Express, which was a small head office and a bunch of slightly muddled franchises, and he took it to the city and got the money to buy up all the franchises, so it became a chain owned under one umbrella. And then expanded that chain and made a fortune in his 20s. And he subsequently has done a good number of, he's got his own fund, and he has invested in a number of restaurant chains and a number of other businesses at scale, with a kind of, not quite a franchise model, but a business model that's kind of cookie cutter and repeatable, like Gale's Bakery, Patisserie Valerie. You know, you build a prototype. He's particularly been good at get a company that might have grown to 3 different outlets in their chain, and then taken them to 100, say, and rolled from there. And we got on because he loves talking about business. He taught me a lot. I learned from some of his experiences, and he was chair of the Lowy Group. He was well networked. He became the chair of Channel 4 at one stage, and he was a columnist in the Sunday Times, and he may be still a columnist in the Telegraph. But yeah, lots of learnings from him. You know, learned from my father, learned from Luke, and then we got some outside investors in Lowy Group, some American venture capitalists called Veronis Sula Stevenson, VSS, who co-invested with a group called Abry, ABRY, to the tune of about £20 million in Lowy Group and 5 million of leverage. So again, I've learned about startups, I've learned about family business, I've learned about scaling, I've learned about PE and outside investors, and all of the different governance aspects of how you have to manage your shareholders, stakeholders and colleagues in those different setups.
And obviously the Lowy Group became a large business with lots of third-party institutional investors. You know, at what point were you able to take your value off the table? And at what point did you decide, no longer do I want to be part of the business that, in fact, you set up?
I got fired.
Did you? Were you naughty, Charlie, or was there another reason for that?
It was, we had, in the downturn, the credit crunch hit, and marketing services in a recession is one of the first things that people cut.
Well, it's perceived discretionary, isn't it?
Do we need to upgrade our website?
That's right.
Do we need some new brochures? Do we need to change the packaging on our products? Let's leave it a couple of years. The HQ's going, right, where do we save money? Right, let's not do quite as much marketing. And the crunch of the credit crunch, which hasn't been repeated since, was a kind of stop everything, it's locked down, and marketing budgets were stopped for it fell off a cliff and then would rock bottom for a number of quarters. And that was a killer if you've got 20 million of investors and 5 million of debt. And the perception on the board, which painfully I had created, Luke Johnson had exited at that point, but I had a couple of non-execs and a couple of people in the operating business and the outside investors. The board decided, without me, to replace me. And so I think their thinking was, Charlie has been a positive salesman and business developer, charming in the 6 big acquisitions, and the downturn needs someone who's more spreadsheety and more gritty, and maybe a different type of experience. It's not to say more experienced, but it was like, it wasn't, our performance was suffering. It's a bit like swapping your football manager, and I was relieved of my duties in that I was taken out, but also there was probably a learning about the relief that I was a growth person, a scale-up person, and the outside factors meant that there was nothing much I could do, and it would have been extremely stressful. So I had 15% of the company going into that. I had taken a small amount out in some of the rounds, but I was still looking to roll and build, and was still the biggest individual shareholder. But the business continued to be under strain with the broader economic environment, and ultimately I was swamped, as they say, by the whoever owns the debt owns the company. The PE guys and the bank diluted everybody else.
So what did that mean in terms of your value in your business that you founded?
I might have had a value of £6 million going to mythical 10 million, and I ultimately got a check that didn't pay for a new kitchen.
Wow.
About 15 grand.
Definitely, as far as, I guess, capital value goes, you certainly didn't realise anything from that journey to the extent that you
I got a few hundred grand along the way in some of the previous rounds.
But yes, that definitely feels like you were shortchanged.
It was a chess game I didn't win.
Sure, I totally respect that.
And you've got to analyse that. In being released, I was given severance.
Yes.
Which was like a year's pay.
Sure.
So I had a year of runway to try and think of what I would do next, and I was quite cross, and I wandered around, sort of. If you know that book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah, I do.
I kept commuting to try and get out of the house.
To be inspired.
And I went into tech. I wrote a blog. I followed a load of other people. I went into my network and I talked to people and said, what should I do next? And I was about 40 then. I was like, should I do some completely left field thing, go and open a boutique bed and breakfast in Zanzibar, and it was at that point that I also started doing business plans, and I met Jill, Rachel, and together we wrote the business plan for Futurehead's recruitment business, and I became a IQ Capital. There's a business called IQ Capital in Cambridge, which is money and know-how, and who I met along the way. And I thought, I have a very small amount of capital. I can't buy a factory, which is high cost and capital, but I can work with people businesses and help them with the plumbing of their business and some of my experience on the growth journey and writing business plans that I've been doing since I was 10, and getting the spreadsheets and doing the January, February, March, April, don't forget to put the cost of the heating in, the cost of the phones, all of those things, and where are we going to get the income from. And with Futureheads, we did that business plan, and I put down the capital. So there were three people operating and me with cash, and we went 25% each into the business.
And that was investor and chairman.
Yes.
And of course, since then, not only has Futureheads continued to scale to become a very successful digital recruitment business, but as you mentioned, you have interest now in other businesses like Opencast here in the Northeast. It would be really interesting to understand, I guess, Charlie, how you have now repurposed yourself from being CEO, shareholder, to being chairman, non-exec advisor.
Yes.
Because of course that is different, isn't it? Because you now have plural interests.
Yes. I think the journey I've always loved delegating. And I don't know which business book how do you grow? You need to, hire giants and the gene pool in the business. You need to have challenge and you need people to grow so that you're not, and I think psychologically I've got a decent level of insight, emotional intelligence, EQ as well as IQ, to be able to see and want to grow people. And when the businesses have been making money, which isn't that hard in tech, in demand areas, to get some of the money flow, to then be able to be looking across helicopter level an individual business and bringing people on to make yourself redundant. So I've always been, and that's quite CEO-ish, and it's only another step to be kind of chair in all of that. And I've always loved working with people partners, and I've done that with all the businesses. The modus operandi that I saw back in Futureheads was there are people who have worked in a specific professional services context, role, job, and they've got to 35, 40, they don't necessarily have the capital, but they have the experience. And if you can help them hatch and build their own pathway to building a business, they are very motivated, and you can work with them and help them to realise their own growth journeys and business. And that's what I did with Futureheads, with Opencast, with GVIT Insurance, three of the businesses that I'm still involved with, where people have been in a business. I helped them set up their own business and then have steered through. And chairing is I think I've got better at it. There is that kind of classic, are you really just the CEO? And I'm not a kind of coach mentor type person. I think I may even say I've had it on my LinkedIn profile if it's not there anymore. I'm more Simon Cowell around, no, this is what you should do, suck that up, rather than, can you tell me how you think you might think about this in this context? But I think, it's back to the sort of communicator piece. I like to work with people so that we understand the thinking of a particular situation, and then we can tumble those ideas together. I think that's a extrovert personality aspect. Yeah, I've always been that kind of, explainer. You tumble around the issues, and they're out there, and you share in the journey of creating the answer to problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
And obviously you founded Dynamo here in the Northeast as a consequence of your love and passion for all things technology, Charlie.
Yes.
And I saw just recently you stepped down as chairman.
Yes.
What was the reason for that decision?
So I founded Dynamo to make some money, and to make, but in a network kind of way.
Yes.
I moved up here having ultimately decided I will get a job with my dad, take over his business and build that. I hadn't found any other job to take, and the property business is relatively slow compared to the cut and thrust of tech and people businesses, and I was looking for a network that would help me with deal flow for tenants for Hoult Yard. And I know that in small businesses and growth businesses, one of the hardest things is to find customers. And so a network. I was seeing different tech businesses wanting to rent offices. Bede Gaming came when they wanted an office 30 people, rang them up 2 months later and said, you know that office you really like for 30 people, do you want to rent it? And they went, have you got an office for 50 people? So I could see that what I'd seen in London of tech and growth actually existed in the Northeast, and I was surprised in the Northeast that you meet Dan Smith from Bede Gaming and you go, well, Paul Walker, who's the founding CEO of Sage, lives up the road. Have you ever met him? No, never met him. I don't. And I'm like, the Northeast is a village, and these people didn't know each other, and there are all these people doing these amazing journeys, and there was potential to share experience. And so I kind of thought, let's start and pull together sort of dining club, and then realised there was a whole agenda of regeneration as well as, you know, primary output. Let's cut some invoices between us, you know, let's do trading and partnering.
And that's really inspiring and exciting in equal proportion. And of course, Dynamo is now hugely successful, Charlie, for all stakeholders involved. So tell me, why did you decide now is the right time to step down as chairman?
Well, I've done it for 10 years.
Okay.
And we'd had success. And there's established infrastructure. Through the pandemic, we bid for and got some government funds. So there is a staff base, and I felt there was more responsibility to fulfil the objectives of the government small print for the funding, etc. And I wasn't giving enough time to all of that. And so we're looking for a new chair, and interviewing people in the coming weeks. And so on the one side, Dynamo itself has matured. We've merged it with another group, the Digital Catapult Sunderland Software City group, because again, I always thought it would be useful to have one front door for the tech sector in the northeast. And there have been a number of other organisations, but that group now is 25, 30, 35 people, so that the ability to do stuff is stronger, and the responsibilities of it all are more, you know, challenging, more responsible, more grown up. And I, on the other side, the scale-up journey with Opencast, you know, we've hit 450 people. Through the pandemic, we started with 80 people. And so in 3 or so years, that has multiplied and is very exciting. And I put in a shift, and there's more to do.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see a different horizon for that, which we're
Is it fair to say then, Charlie, that actually you stepping down as chair from Dynamo is actually you acknowledging that there's 24 hours in a day and you have to prioritise? Is that part of it? Because of course Opencast is a big business, it's demanding.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. Text 100 seems like a long time ago.
Yeah.
If you could tell yourself then one bit of advice that you now know, what would it be, Charlie? So if you could chat to yourself many years ago when you were that graduate raring to rock, what would that one bit of advice be, Charlie?
Well, I've always been ABN. I say always be networking.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, and I don't think I didn't follow that, but I was always interested in people and their journeys, and tracking what other people have done, seeing how, I suppose that's watching other people's chess games.
Yes.
You know, the kids watch videos of people playing Fortnite. But if you can understand people, you know, because it's so important to understand the drivers and motivations of individuals in the context of companies. And yeah.
I think my last question, Charlie, I could sit and chat all day to you, and I feel as if there's so much we haven't covered, which
There's a lot, yes.
Quite disappointing.
My worst named nightclub of 1992 and Time Out, Pump Your Rump. We've not been on my
Charlie,
whole clubbing adventure.
You'll be coming back for another podcast in the future, but I do have one last question just for now. Obviously, you yourself talked earlier about business being like a game of chess. Do you think, on reflection, anyone you've done business with, / chess with, might feel as if actually they were a pawn and might not have enjoyed the game to the extent you did?
I hope not. But, you know, you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. You know, I'm a fan of, I like Marmite. You know, I don't think I'm particularly Marmite. The most abuse I got in my mayoral campaign, apart from the sort of Brexit mad dog weird stuff, which you can kind of laugh off because it's so weird, you know, I'd rather shit in my hands and clap than vote for a Tory, which got us anatomically trying to work out quite how you actually do that. It were people who had parking fines at Hoult's Yard for outstaying the 60 minutes free, which we thought was a good value aspect. So I think the queue of people who are cross with me is shorter than the queue of people who would have enjoyed working together.
Yes.
And that's probably where if you get to the pearly gates, you would like to net it out.
Yeah, sure thing. Charlie, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure spending time with you. It's been an absolute pleasure spending some time with Charlie Hoult today on the Confessions of a CEO podcast powered by RG. Charlie has a really interesting backstory, having achieved so much in business. And of course, it's been brilliant to get to know more about the things that has driven Charlie to make the decisions that he's made in business. For sure, at some point in the future, we'll be getting Charlie back onto another Confessions of a CEO podcast, because there was so much I'd love to have covered if we had time. But for now, thank you for joining us on this Confessions of a CEO podcast. My name is Carl Swansbury, and look forward to seeing you on future Confessions of a CEO podcasts.